Well, we're going to start today with what is more and more perhaps one of the biggest headline stories of our times. It is, of course, climate change, a defining human development challenge of our 21st century. Well, this is a vital year for responding to that challenge, with the UN conference set for December in Copenhagen in Denmark. The international community is trying to agree on a legally binding agreement to replace the 1997 Kyoto Protocol that expires in 2012. Well, this week's climate change talks in Barcelona are seen as a last-ditch attempt before Copenhagen, and with just 4 weeks left, can we really realize that goal?
Mount Chomolungma is weeping. As global warming speeds up, Himalayan glaciers are melting at an alarming rate. Unless it stops, 80% of the glaciers here will disappear in 30 years. The ensuing floods would mean disaster for the 1.3 billion people living below. The time to act is now. The Nepalese government is to hold a cabinet meeting on Mount Chomolungma this month to highlight the impact of global warming. This comes just weeks after the government of the Maldives went to another extreme to focus global attention on rising sea levels. Blizzards, drought, and floods. Extreme weather is making the rounds. This week, some 4,000 negotiators from 190 countries met in Barcelona to address the problem. The 5-day climate talks were the last chance to finalize a new global warming pact before the UN conference in Copenhagen next month.
A successful deal must strengthen the world's ability to cope with inevitable changes. Failure to reach broad agreement in Copenhagen would be morally inexcusable, economically short-sighted, and politically unwise. We cannot go down this road.
The New Deal would replace the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, due to expire in 2012. The protocol requires industrial nations to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 5% from 1990 levels by 2012. The UN statistics show that between 1990 and 2007, emissions of 40 industrialized countries fell by 4%. Control of greenhouse gases varied widely over the period. Emissions in Spain rose by more than 50%, but in Germany they fell by more than 20%. Kyoto applies only to industrialized nations. But the New Deal requires both developed and developing countries to act together. The past 2 months have seen intensified efforts by the world nations to shape the outcome of Copenhagen, the UN Climate Conference in New York, the G20 Summit in Pittsburgh, the UN climate meetings in Bangkok. But progress towards a deal has been far too slow.
And most important reason is the lack of political will, especially at the highest level of government, the presidents and heads of states, and particularly countries like United States. Obama president is showing very low leadership in taking his commitment of climate leadership in the world. So Barcelona is the chance for the world leaders, for the countries to show their genuine willingness to fulfill their responsibility in saving climate change.
The fate of the Kyoto Protocol is in question. The EU has always been a firm supporter of the deal, but Washington claims it would be too expensive and wants targets for developing countries. But analysts say the EU is now tarnishing its reputation as the traditional leader in the fight against climate change.
I'm more confident now.
To get the US on board, the EU is trying to strike a watered-down deal.
EU is trying to accommodate US politics and interest, and that's worrying because EU should take more leadership, and I think EU has the power and has capacity to move US forward.
The U.S. engagement is vital for a climate change deal. George W. Bush rejected the Kyoto Protocol. His successor, Barack Obama, is determined to do more. But he hasn't yet offered a firm target for reducing emissions by 2020.
Dr. Senator Hatch,
Right.
On Tuesday, the Senate started hearings on a bill that would set a 20% target. But analysts say it's unlikely to be passed before Copenhagen, as Obama is focusing on what he clearly sees as a higher priority, healthcare reform.
It's true that in the US, domestic legislation process is moving at a slow speed to give US a tool to reduce their emission. However, the scale of the problem and the responsibility that US must take need US to work much faster and take much more leadership and bring it to the international climate talks.
The EU has promised a cut of at least 20% below 1990 levels by 2020. Japan has promised a 25% cut. America is the world's second largest greenhouse gas emitter. A U.S. number is essential. But Washington is pointing the finger at developing countries.
Those rapidly growing developing nations that will produce nearly all the growth in global carbon emissions in the decades ahead must do their part as well. Some of these nations have already made great strides with the development and deployment of clean energy. Still, they need to commit to strong measures at home and agree to stand behind those commitments, just as the developed nations must stand behind their own.
So far, the majority of emissions have come from rich countries. America and Europe have produced nearly 3/4 of the carbon dioxide from energy production since 1850. Developing countries like China, India, Brazil, and South Africa have promised to do more, but say the developed countries should take the lead.
各位同事，
Developed countries should support developing countries in tackling climate change. This not only is their responsibility, but also serves their long-term interests.
继续坚定不移地为应对气候变化。
Chinese President Hu Jintao and U.S. President Barack Obama will meet in Beijing in the middle of this month, and climate change will be a major topic. It's expected China and America, who together account for 40% of the world's carbon emissions, will cooperate widely on clean energy development. As time is fast running out, both the EU and the developing countries are watching the U.S. carefully. Obama will collect the Nobel Peace Prize on December 10th in Oslo. Copenhagen is only a few hundred kilometers away. Many are hoping the U.S. president will stop by and make a difference.
Well, what can we say? The world is surely now at a critical juncture on the way towards achieving a legally binding agreement on climate change. But behind the rhetoric is a bargaining in national interest and a struggle of political powers.